Hello everyone, my name is Gus and I am the host of Dive Talk. I'm also a scuba diving instructor and a certified technical rebreather and cave diver. I wanted to watch this video called The Dangerous Truth of Jacob's Well. It was posted a couple of months ago and somebody kind of shared with me and pointed out some inconsistencies. They were like, you should watch this and react to it live. So I have the video right here. We're going to be watching it live and I will be making comments along the way. All right, so let's get started.
Located in Hays County, Texas, about an hour outside of Austin, is a submerged sinkhole fed by a natural spring known as Jacob's Well.
This is interesting. I'm going to pause right here really quick. Notice that he said that this is fed by a natural spring. When you look into caves to dive, cave diving, there's mainly two types of caves with flow. One is a siphon, which essentially has the water going into the cave. Very dangerous. We never dive in siphons. And the other one is a spring, like Jacob's Well. Spring means the water is coming out of the hole, which means that as you go into the cave, you have to push yourself to go into it. But if you have to come out because of an emergency or because your dive is over and you're coming out, the water is actually pushing you along the way. So actually, I love that feeling in the caves that I dive. There are springs because on the way out, it's kind of like a conveyor belt. So you fight your way to swim into whatever your plan is. So let's say your plan distance is to swim in 2,000 feet into the cave. And then on the way back out, you just ride it out. Right? The water is pushing you out, which is great. And the reason why I point this out about Jacob's Well is because, the title of the video is kind of misleading, talking about the dangerous truth of it, like the hole is going to swallow you. It's actually trying to keep you out. You have to fight the current to get into it because it's a spring. So let's keep going.
The well draws both those looking for some cool water to splash around in and adrenaline junkies willing to risk it all for the thrill of exploration. If you dive deep into the sinkhole, you'll find an underwater cave system whose siren song has led multiple divers to their deaths. According to Heather Alexander...
By the way, this is not Jacob's Well. This is massive. This seems to be like a computer animation. It actually reminds me of a cave/cavern called Beaufort Springs. If you Google this, Beaufort Springs, it's beautiful. It's way deeper than Jacob's Well, by the way, but it's a beautiful cavern.
Of the Houston Chronicle. At least a dozen divers have died attempting to explore the cave system, which can be accessed at 100 feet down the sinkhole. Alexander spoke to Don Dibble.
Now notice the map, because we might come back to the actual map. This is like a hand-drawn map of the well, and one of the things that I want you to see is the different zones within the actual cave itself. So there's one right here, and there's one thing they talk about, which is a fake chimney, which is, I assume, is this thing up here. So if you're in a hurry, or maybe this one, if you're in a hurry and you're trying to get out and you miss the exit, you might get stuck there. But there are things that we do as cave divers to avoid that, and I'll talk about those along the way. But you notice that there's like a place to exit there, then there's another one, then there's another one, and then finally the last one, the fourth one. So when they talk about restrictions and areas within the cave, they talk about the first one, the second one, whatever it is. That's what they're talking about. So number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
A diver local to Hays County who has assisted in searches for missing explorers in the cave system.
By the way, there's so many good videos about divers out there. Why use a movie, some fake diving movie out there? Although I know the people that were consultants in this movie, and there's actually a lot of legit diving going on, and technical diving specifically.
Explaining why so many people have risked their lives at Jacob's Well, Dibble said, "It was the forbidden fruit, the allure of doing something dangerous." Or as Patrick Swayze's Bodie put it in Point Break,
"You want the ultimate, you gotta be willing to pay the ultimate price."
Unlike Bodie, though, there's nothing sexy about...
Now notice that this diver right here, which by the way, I think I've seen this 60-minute special. It was about cave diving at 60 Minute Australia. And notice that she's using a line to go in. This line is a little bit exaggerated. I realized they're using it for the actual, short that they filmed, because when we cave dive, you want to have a continuous line from the entry of the cave all the way until you go and come back. You never not have a line. It's one of the rules of cave diving. But the line stops pretty much where the cavern starts. The cavern, by the way, is where there's natural light. So you can see natural light. Now, obviously, if you're diving at like midnight or something like that, you're not going to see light. It's going to be dark. But if it's during the day and the sun is out, then as soon as you see natural light creeping in through a hole or a gap in the, the ceiling or whatever, then that is a cavern, and you don't really need a line because you're able to see your way out. So we typically, if we're going to lay line from the cavern area, it's going to be from the cavern area to the line that goes into the cave. I personally have never dove in a cave that doesn't have line. I've been into several caves, and they all always have a line into them, which you can tie to from the cavern section. But most caves do a good job, laying the line so the line starts where the cavern is, so you don't have to lay your own line. So they're doing this right in the cavern. You can see the line because it looks good on TV.
The tragedies at Jacob's Well. On September 9th, 1979, a group of friends from California arrived at Jacob's Well for a diving excursion. It was almost midnight, but as the group set up their tents, two of them, 20-year-old Kent Maupin and 21-year-old Mark Brashear, decided they wanted to squeeze in a quick dive before bed.
I like that they say, oh, we're just going to squeeze a quick dive. There's no such thing as a quick dive. Like, it takes a long time to get prepared to go diving. I think the water at Jacob's Well is something like 68 degrees, which is pretty cold for diving. So this is not something where you have a swimsuit, you just throw something on and let me go diving. Like, it takes a lot of preparation to go on a dive. The fact that they're doing it at midnight is kind of bizarre. Now, from what I was reading about these guys, they weren't cave certified. They weren't cave divers. By the way, this happened in 1979. There were no dive computers. There's no SPGs or submersible pressure gauges telling you how much air you have left. You actually use something called a J valve, which had a little bit of air left. So when you run out of air, you hit this J valve. It gives you enough air so you can come to the surface. So the technology of diving wasn't really where it is today. Today is way safer, right, to go diving into caves. These guys, they weren't cave certified. They didn't have the right equipment, and they're going to go diving in the middle of the night. Like, that's just nonsense. Like, the fact that they expected to survive this is beyond me. But anyway, that's one of them, by the way, was a scuba diving instructor. And a lot of deaths when it comes to cave diving are from instructors, because once they make it to instructor, they feel like, I'm an expert diver. There's nothing that can go wrong. I can dive anywhere, which is not true. Don't go diving in caves if you're not cave certified.
Despite the late hour, there were other divers at the site who saw the two men descend to the depths of the well and maneuver themselves through the tight opening to the cave's deepest chamber.
I thought that was funny. He said, despite the late hour, like, there's a light inside a cave underwater. There's never a light, so the cave looks the exact same whether you're going in at 10 in the morning, 10 in the middle of the night, whatever. It doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of cave divers that like to go in at night because the cave is exactly the same. It's pitch black, but there's not a whole lot of people in the area where the caves are located. A lot of caves that we go diving in are open to swimmers as well, just like Jacob's Well. So going in the middle of the night actually makes sense because nobody's going to be swimming there, but you have space to lay out your gear and set up, and you don't have all these people jumping in from a rock into the well or whatever it is. So it's not weird that they're going in the middle of the night. So they're saying, like, despite the fact that it was late, doesn't matter that it's late, the cave looks the same regardless of the time of day.
Which required them to take off their oxygen tanks.
Okay, this is the one that bothers me the most with videos that are made by non-divers for divers. The oxygen tank. That's not a thing. Divers, if you're not a diver, a lot of people think that what we dive with is oxygen. It's not. Oxygen is actually toxic past 20 feet. 20 feet, you reach a PPO2, or a percentage of oxygen on your blood, essentially. The concentration of oxygen that is 1.6, which means that you can start having convulsions after that. So no one dives with 100% oxygen in a tank. We dive with air most of the time. Compressed air, or the air that you breathe, is actually 21% oxygen and roughly 79% nitrogen and other gases. But nitrogen makes 78.2%, I believe. So when you go diving, you have air. It's an air tank. It's actually an air cylinder. We're not even supposed to call them tank, but calling them tanks is not a big deal. But it's air. You run out of air, you don't run out of oxygen. So that's one thing that bothers divers a lot, actually.
and pull them in separately. It was reported that one of the divers who witnessed the two disappear into the chamber noted that the men didn't have backup lights or a safety line.
How do you know they don't have backup lights? That's what I want to know, because when I see divers in caves, I have no idea what lights they have. I can see they have one light because they are, as I'm swimming by them, I can see that they have a flashlight. But how can you tell they don't have backup lights? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever that you can look at somebody and know they don't have a light. Here's an example. All right. So here's my primary light for cave diving. This I wear on my left hand like this, so I can light up and still use my hand. It's not tight, so that's why it's all wobbly. But this light is 6300 lumen, so it's super, super bright. Then as a backup, I actually use a very similar light on my right hand. So it goes right here. And again, I can use my hands while the light is mounted in my right hand. I never use this light. This is just a backup light. It's smaller, it's still pretty big, but it's smaller as a backup. And this is 4200 lumen. Now watch this. On top of those two lights, I dive with two other lights, which are 1200 lumen each. These are in my pocket. There's no way that you can tell that my backup lights are in my pocket because they're inside a pocket. So if I didn't have, you're supposed to dive with at least 3 lights. I take 4, and all of the bodies that I dive with, we all take 4 lights. But at least you're supposed to have 3 lights, right? So if your primary goes bad and in the process of you deploying your backup, it falls into the silt and you don't see it anymore, you lost it, you still have another one. And not only that, your bodies also have 3. So there's plenty of lights to go with, but there's no way you can look at me and know that I have more than 1 light. Because when I'm coming swimming at you, all you see is one flashlight lighting the cave. You have no idea if I have another one, let alone 3 more. So I don't know. It just didn't make sense. They are like, oh, somebody saw them going in and they noticed they didn't have a backup light. What are you talking about? Now, if you tell me they noticed they didn't have a light, not only I believe you because they don't have a light going in the cave, but number 2, how can they see anything if they don't have a light? So I think they had a light, and there's absolutely no way you can tell if they don't have a backup light. That's just nonsense.
He said he attempted to get their attention by flashing his own light at them, but that they didn't acknowledge his warning. Neither man resurfaced. Rescue divers, including Don Dibble, spent weeks attempting to recover their bodies, but were unable to traverse the treacherous passage that kept the men trapped at the bottom of Jacob's Well.
By the way, I read a lot about this accident or this death, this tragedy, however you want to call it. Again, people that were not certified going in with, the wrong equipment. But apparently they, what he's talking about, the person that didn't see they had a backup light, this person saw them going into the 4th chamber. If you remember that map that we looked at earlier, the 4th chamber, which by the way is not super deep. I think the max depth at Jacob's Well is 137 feet, which again, if you're a regular diver, that's pretty deep. Actually, your limitation is 130, but if you're TriMix certified, we can go all to 330 feet. So 130, it's not a whole lot. In the realm of things, last month, for example, I had the opportunity to dive in what is known as the Mount Everest of cave diving, which is called Eagle's Nest. And you can look this up. Eagle's Nest goes as deep as 320 feet or something like that. And the cave doesn't start until around, I would say around 180 feet. So Jacob's Well max depth, it's not even the beginning of the cave at Eagle's Nest. So depth is based on your opinion. At the 4th chamber, let's say they were going into the 130 feet, which to me, it doesn't make sense. And the reason why it doesn't make sense is because these guys were going in there with an air cylinder, right? A regular tank on their back. And by the time you make it to 130 feet on the 4th chamber, you're so deep that you're breathing about, if I had to calculate it based on my own internal surface air consumption rate or SAC rate, you're breathing about 2 cubic feet per minute, essentially. So if by the time you make it down there, if you have a tank that is 80 cubic feet, and by the time you make it down there, let's say you have about 60 left, well, you're breathing 2 of those every minute, essentially. And that is assuming they're not freaked out, they're just normal, and they have the same SAC rate I have. My SAC rate is about 0.44 liters per minute, so, or cubic feet per minute, rather. So if I am freaking out and I'm breathing 1 per minute, and I'm add 4 atmospheres or 130 feet, now I'm breathing 4 cubic feet per minute. So the fact that they would go all the way down there, that is super deep, and in regular air they're narked as well, which is like being drunk in air. Nitrogen makes you drunk. It's called nitrogen narcosis, or narked for short. Then, you know, going into that 4th chamber with just a regular tank of air makes no sense for an instructor, especially, right? Someone that is an instructor, I understand they shouldn't be in the cave to begin with, but if you're an instructor, you know at that point that, look, I'm pretty deep, I'm breathing a lot. Why would you push and go into a 4th chamber? Like, that was just, I mean, full-on kamikaze. Like, you just want to die at that point.
After his efforts to recover Maupin and Brashear's bodies, Dibble installed a grate over the entrance to the cave system in an attempt to keep more people from risking their lives. However, when he made a subsequent dive to check on the barrier several months later, the grate had been removed and a note left that read, quote, "You can't keep us out."
All right. That is also total nonsense to me. I could not find anything that talks about this grate other than 2 articles, which is, I think, what the person recording this video based, you know, the whole information on the video about. When you install a grate, I'm actually going to switch into my browser so you can see what I'm talking about. When you install a grate, it looks something like this. So let's find a picture of a grate. All right, so it looks something like this, right? It's full-on rebar that has been welded together with an underwater weld, essentially, and is built into the rock. Like, you cannot move it. This picture right here is a picture of the grate at Genie Springs, a very popular cave. And on the cavern side, where you don't enter the cave system, there's a grate, and you actually go and hold. Like, if you're an open water diver, you go in there and hold. It's not very deep. It's like, I think it's like 50 feet or so, and you go in and hold, and the power of the spring, all the water is coming out of that grate. Actually, it's pretty cool to hang on to that and feel the power of the spring trying to push you away, and then you let go and you just ride it backwards. It's pretty awesome. It's actually really cool. And that, there's absolutely no chance that you can just go and dismantle this crate and then leave a note like, oh, I just have my let me get my cool note and write up, you know, "You can't keep me out, haha, LOL." Like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. Like, somebody's gonna be down there, it's like, oh no, they install a grate, let me get my underwater plasma gun and blow out this. Like, it doesn't work like that. Here's another one. Here's the picture of a grate at Vortex Springs, which is another known place for cave diving, made famous by the disappearance of Ben McDaniel, a diver that went into this thing and he was never found. And I saw some comments on the video for Jacob's Well about this guy saying like, oh, people went in there and they never found them. No, that was actually a Vortex Spring. There's a gate, and you can see is rebar bolted into the rock. I've been there. I've tried to, you know, like move it or whatever and see if you can actually move it. It's solid. It's like a prison cell. You cannot just straight up go and remove it. Like, no big deal. Like, in order to install it, you have to have special machinery and a plan and measurements and stuff like that. Know what you're doing. And you're going to tell me that some redneck just went in there with a tank and removed it? What are you talking about? That makes no sense. So, anyway, on the video, the whole there was a crate there, and now, you know, somebody went there and removed it and left a note like the Joker, like, haha, you can keep it. What are you talking about? That makes no sense at all.
Maupin and Brashear are 2 of the many who have lost their lives in Jacob's Well.
2 of the many, 12, which they said at the beginning of the video.
Maupin, at least, was an experienced diver who had been at it since he was 12 and was already a certified dive instructor. What about the well is so hazardous that it claims the lives of even experienced divers? In a 2001
By the way, I don't know if you noticed it. I'm going to rewind for a second.
Diver who had been at it since he was 12 and was already a certified dive instructor. What about the well is so hazardous that it claims the lives of even experienced divers?
You can see, I don't know if you can tell, there's a line there. There's a line at the bottom. It goes under the rock. And you can't tell because it's not a gray great quality. This is not Jacob's Well, by the way. This is another cave. Again, almost the entirety of the video does not show any video about Jacob's Well whatsoever. There's plenty of it in YouTube, though. If you search it, diving Jacob's Well, there's a lot of videos out there if you really want to see what it looks like. And it gets pretty tight. I think the toughest restriction is 16 inches, which I wouldn't go through because I draw the line when it comes to removing equipment to fit through a restriction. I'm not going to do that. If I dive rebreathers, by the way. I don't dive with a regular tank. If I had a side mount rebreather that would make me smaller, maybe I would dare to go through a restriction like that. But the toughest one I've been through is about 2 feet. So this one is a little bit less than that. It's about 8 inches smaller than that. And on the one that I went through, which was to Woody's room at Peacock Springs, if you want to Google this and see where Woody's room sits, which is on the top left of the map, that restriction was about 2 feet tall, and I was dragging myself through the silt or bumping into the ceiling of the tunnel essentially at that point. So it was pretty tight. Anything tighter than that, I'm not interested. I actually don't want to go back to Woody's room after experiencing how tight that was.
In a 2001 article on Visit Wimberley, author Louis Bond laid out the various difficulties of navigating the cave system. In addition to extremely narrow passageways between the various chambers, Bond also refers to a, quote, false chimney, of which he says, it appears to be a way out of the well, but has trapped at least one diver.
Yeah, so that's what I was talking about. Like, there's a chimney, I'm going to go up in it and surface, but you are following a line. Like, one of the rules of cave diving is you have to always have a line to the cavern or to the exit. When I dive with this thing right here, which is a 400-foot line, is my main line. Unless I don't need it because the entrance of the cave has a really good line and I don't have to tie to. I sometimes don't bring this. And the reason why I don't bring this sometimes is because I also have, let me grab this. I have two 200-foot lines with me, or reels or spools, however you want to call it. This ones I bring on every single cave dive that I go to. So these are two 200 spools that I can tie, if I want to explore a section of the cave that doesn't have a line in, right? So you always want to have a line that connects you to the main line of the cave. They're actually called jumps. You make jumps into other lines as well. And on top of those two, I have 2 of these. These are 75-footers, which I can use for jumps. Typically, the main reels I want to keep and not use for jumps, I want to use the smaller ones. I have 2 of these. 2 of these. And in addition to this, I have 2 other ones that are 50-footers, and I have 3 other ones that are 20. So if I have smaller jumps, and by the way, all of this is based on the planning that we do before we go in the dive. If we have any jumps that are small, like we need to jump 10 feet from one line to another, I'm going to use a cookie spool essentially, or a jump line to go from one to the next one. So you always plan your dives and bring enough line to make sure you always have a line to the exit. So this fake chimney obviously would not have a line. So I'm not going to follow some line into a trap because there's no exit there. So, that being the reason of why people die, again, makes no sense for a cave diver.
In deeper caverns, tight spaces combined with gravel and silt flooring can make visibility a major issue, particularly if the divers aren't careful not to stir up the loose material. A more serious grate has been installed to keep non-authorized divers from the temptation of exploring the dangerous depths of the well. But it didn't prevent 21-year-old diver Diego Adami from near catastrophe in 2015. Adami was doing a free dive and had descended to around 100 feet when one of his flippers came off.
Right, and he calls it flipper. That's another thing. We call them fins. No one calls fins flippers. There's actually a video of this on YouTube. If you search for free diving to the 4th chamber or 3rd chamber, something like that, I watched the video where he loses the fin. You can actually see it. I wonder why he didn't use the actual video from Diego in the video to show what happened. But he wasn't close to dying. Like, they prepare for this. I don't know why Diego lost the fin. To be honest, that should be the last thing you lose if you're a free diver. You don't have a whole lot of equipment, to be honest, when you're free diving. So, but anyway, I mean, he went back to his training or his experience as a free diver, and he just, kicked up with one fin, and he was fine. I mean, you're going on the way up. You don't have an ascent rate to maintain, which scuba divers have to. You can just bolt to the surface and be good to go, which is what Diego did. like, oh, he was near catastrophe. Near catastrophe would be if Diego got caught up on something. If his fin got, tangled with fishing line, for example, which happened to me going into Eagle's Nest, and then you have to, you don't have a way to free yourself. I dive with a rebreather, so I got tangled into fishing line at Eagle's Nest. My body just cut it off. The rebreather gives me an opportunity to be underwater for 5 hours. So even if I run into an issue where I get tangled or whatever it is, I have 5 hours to figure it out. Something that open circuit divers, which dive with a regular tank, cannot have. And obviously, if you're a free diver, you only have a few minutes to be able to do it. So that's why I don't go into caves without a rebreather.
Greatly reducing his mobility. With his adrenaline surging and his lungs screaming for oxygen, Adami made the decision to leave the lost piece of equipment and try to surface with just one flipper.
Flipper. The other thing is the oxygen, the lungs don't scream for oxygen. The urgency to breathe comes from CO2 building up in your system, not for lack of O2 or oxygen. So your lungs are never screaming for oxygen. Your body's building CO2 in your system, and that's what makes you want to breathe. But free divers know how to deal with it. Free divers actually do a breathing technique before they go on the dive to remove excess CO2. So based on the video that I saw, I don't think Diego was anywhere near to running out of oxygen or whatever, this guy said.
Thankfully for Adami, his dive training kicked in and he managed to remain calm and focused. He surfaced just as his body began to run out of oxygen and avoided becoming another casualty of Jacob's well. Check out one of our newest videos right here.
Okay. So, the video is clearly made by non-divers for non-divers too, I think, and for some divers as well. The bottom line is Jacob's well as a cave is actually not very challenging. It's not very deep. It's not very big. So as a cave, I would love to go diving in it, but it's not Eagle's Nest. It's not one of these massive caves that are, on the bucket list for people. Would I go into it? Absolutely. Would I be afraid that I'm going to die or whatever? No, never, because of the training that I went through. And I've been in situations that have been pretty sketchy that I know for sure that if an open water diver was in that situation without training, it doesn't matter if he's an instructor or not, they would have died for sure. And only the training that I have was, it's what allowed me to react to the emergency and perform and come out alive without any issues. Actually, we didn't even call the dive off in most situations, right? So the bottom line of this video and every other video about cave diving is, if you don't have cave diving training, do not go cave diving. It's as simple as that. I mean, there's a reason why cave diving is called the black belt of scuba diving. There's a ton of skills that you have to learn and practice in order to get certified and be able to go and dive in cave safely. So that is really the bottom line. Don't go cave diving if you're not cave certified. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one, especially if you have any recommendations that you would like for me to react to, or maybe Woody, my co-host at Dive Talk, to react to. I'm happy to look at that and, tell you my thoughts along the way on the air and live, here in the channel. And again, if you enjoy videos like this one, please subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when videos like this come out. But for now, I hope you enjoy this one, and we'll see you in the next one.